How's it going?
All right. Before we get started, Amar and I wanted to say hello. I'm Jack. That's Amar, for those of you who don't know us. And welcome to our presentation. So.
All right. So today we're going to be talking about some of the rights that we have, but also larger corporations have when it comes to funding our elections and kind of lobbying in general. So one of the first cases we're going to look at is one of the most notorious Supreme Court cases of all time, and that's Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission. But what both of these Supreme Court cases boil down to is the issue of the First Amendment and how the First Amendment applies to corporations as well as individuals. And it's been
Wow.
Any thoughts here? Why
What?
Mr. Chairman, you need a charger. What am I going to do? How far back? I don't think it's
I was ready to build it up. I was ready to hit my stride.
you were getting started? You want to start again? Did you stop it? No, don't you?
Oh, should I stop it? Oh, okay.
You know that smell? No, I don't. It's all the way back. I wrote it. It's all the way back. You took bathrooms out of the zoo.
Sorry. Yeah, it's gonna be different.
So it's the zoo that makes them slow?
No, it's the back. This is the baboon itself. The sticky animal.
The zoo.
Yeah, you took baboons out of the zoo. Oh, the zoo itself is smell good.
No, because I'm filming.
I'm not trying to do it for good.
They're notorious for smelling horrible. So if someone says on her like a baboon, he should be. I'm just saying it smells.
Does anyone else have garbage? You ate the wrapper? So rude.
You go chew it and then put it in. Election money bag. Yeah, I think it's that one.
Can you talk to me one day?
Election money bag.
He's like stealing that. Sure.
Okay, so can we? That's for our activity. So let's just have them sit and watch.
Good job, Jacob.
All right. You have the clicker?
Just get through the. We already said hello, so.
We're ready. Hello again.
Now the clicker's not working.
Seriously? Why don't one of you go behind the computer? Yeah.
There it is.
Nope.
Great
problems.
That clicker?
That's right.
Hey.
Let me see it. Did you turn it off?
It was excellent. How did I have a beer
Oh, that's perfect. All right. All right, we're gonna try that
Can we all come
again.
together now? Thank you.
So it's been a well-documented fact that individuals have the right under the First Amendment to donate their exposable income on the candidate of their choosing. It's part of the electoral process that if you have money and want to support a candidate, you should be able to under your own free will. But what Citizens United really looked at was the right of corporations to use their money to influence elections, because it's a very well-known fact that large corporations, if they really wanted to, had the money and the means necessary to pour all of their money, or at least a substantial portion of it into an election and influence the result of an election. That's what Citizens United, the premise of Citizens United is. So, a little bit of case background. In the lead up to the 2008 election, there was first in 2002, there was something called the BCRA passed, which was a legislation it was both sides, and both Democrats and Republicans came together to pass this legislation, and it was a set of comprehensive federal elections reform. It set limits on campaign funding and when you can fund campaigns. And in 2008, the super PAC called Citizens United, where the case gets its name from, funded a movie called Hillary the Movie in an effort to show the American voters that Hillary Clinton was unfit to be president. But as we see, Section 203 of the BCRA said that airing this movie within 60 days of the federal election would be unconstitutional because the Citizens United Super PAC was funded by this massive corporation. And because it wasn't individuals who were actually funding this movie, but rather the larger corporation, under Section 203 of the BCRA, this movie would be unconstitutional. And Citizens United took this case to the courts to appeal so that they were actually able to show this movie in an effort to influence the election. And so on Citizens United, they were arguing that they had the First Amendment right and that there wasn't a differentiation between individuals and corporations for them to show this movie. Just like if I wanted to go out, produce a movie and convince people that Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump was bad, I would be able to, but because this was actually funded through Citizens United, which was funded by corporations, that's where the issue came into play. And then on the FEC side, what the Federal Elections Commission argued, specifically with the BCRA, but more in general, was that there should be restrictions on how corporations spend money in elections because corporations have the means and the money necessary to influence these elections in a way that other individuals would not be able to.
Go ahead.
All right. And this is from, eventually, the Supreme Court decided for Citizens United, so against this comprehensive bipartisan campaign reform act. And in the majority opinion, it said the BCRA, as you can see, has essentially muffled the voices of corporations, and because corporations make up a large part of their economy, corporation rights also need to be protected. So the main reason in the majority opinion is that the rights of these corporations shall not be infringed upon to spend money in elections, because in essence, corporations are just a collection of individuals, and therefore we cannot tread on this opinion. And then the impact of this, so we see right here in 2010 when the decision came out, there was about $200 million spent on federal elections, but in the immediate aftermath, we see an outpouring of money into our federal elections. But this isn't just someone has $10 and wants to support Andrew Yang. These are massive corporations spending, as you can see, billions of dollars to influence our elections. And then Jack's going to talk about another aftermath of Citizens United.
Yeah, so 4 years later, another case was brought to the Supreme Court, and it was McCutcheon versus the FEC. So just as a little bit of case background, with that same bipartisan campaign reform act that Amar talked about, something else that was also really important about it was that it set two different limits on what individuals could contribute. So it was about $48,000 for what they could donate to candidates altogether, and about $75,000 for what they could donate to PACs and party committees. Meaning essentially, as an individual, there was an aggregate limit on the amount of money I could spend between all of the candidates, all of the parties, and all of the super PACs I chose to support. So Sean McCutcheon was a wealthy Alabama businessman, and he thought that having these aggregate limits were a violation of his First Amendment rights, because he believed it was his own First Amendment right to be able to donate and support whatever candidate he wanted. So he sued the FEC, and the Republican National Committee joined and supported his lawsuit because essentially Sean McCutcheon supported a lot of Republican politicians. So these were the two main arguments on both sides of the case that we saw. So on the McCutcheon side, you saw them arguing the First Amendment right that he could use his money to promote whatever candidates he wanted to, however much he wanted to, with his own money. And then also that having these limits doesn't prevent corruption. So one of the biggest parts of that Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act was that if you had it, you were going to stop corruption because there's less money in politics. The McCutcheon side essentially argued whether there's a limit or not, you're basically going to see the same amount of corruption. And then on the FEC side, you saw that they argued that there's more political corruption when when wealthy individuals can influence elections more by being able to donate more. And then the FEC's biggest argument was that when you get rid of this limit, it allows that money to be pooled to more and more candidates. And that's through something called a joint fundraising committee, which essentially allows you to pool money, which I'll get to in a minute. But first, that case was filed in the D.C. courts, which means it made it up to the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is the second highest court right before the Supreme Court. And in that case, they ruled on the side of the FEC, essentially warning that if you got rid of these limits, candidates would be able to pool money together. And that's through something called a joint fundraising committee. And that's what the heart of this case essentially comes down to, because the FEC warned about them in their briefs. And how it works is it allows campaign money to be pooled by committees throughout the same party. So let's say Ms. Agar and Amar are in the same party. And as a candidate and as an individual, I donate $3,000 to each one of them because they're in my party. But let's say Amar's in a tight race and Ms. Agar isn't. They can pool that money together, so maybe Amar gets $5,000 of those dollars and Ms. Agar gets $1,000. So essentially with these committees, wealthy individuals have more power because the money can be spread out throughout the party. So the case made its way to the Supreme Court, and they sided with the side of McCutcheon. And the main reason of the majority opinion was that having a limit doesn't really prevent corruption, or at least not enough so that it should infringe on the First Amendment rights of individuals. And they made in their majority opinion, they made a really interesting analogy where they said that they have no right to tell individuals what candidates to support as much as they have the right to tell newspapers what candidates they should endorse. So they essentially equated the wealth of individuals to the power of the power that newspapers have when it comes to endorsing candidates. So the impacts of this case are really important, and that's through the JFCs. So now the individual money can be essentially pooled through all the parties. So all money that goes to Republican candidates and Democratic candidates can essentially be shared by the party, but without that aggregate limit. Meaning instead of having about a $50,000 cap on what I can donate, what you see happening is that individuals can donate millions and millions to parties, and that money can all get pooled together and go to the candidates who really need it the most. And that significantly increases the power of the wealthy when it comes to influencing elections, because instead of having that maximum, they can donate a whole lot more. And then the other big part of this is influence. So without having an aggregate limit, I can donate to more candidates because there's no maximum. And that allows me to have access to more candidates. And what's really important is Yale Political Science did a study on what happens when wealthy individuals and people who donated to campaigns try to talk to elected officials, where essentially if you donated a significant amount, you are significantly more likely than any other constituent to have a meeting, to have an elected official hear out your own opinion and essentially have them push your own policy because you just simply put have more influence on them. So with that, part of this was creating a creative piece. So even though Amar and I wouldn't call ourselves much of an artist, we made a political cartoon, and even though the drawing isn't the best, I think what it stands for is really important. So first, let's explain a little bit. We have a gavel here representing the Supreme Court. You have Citizens United and McCutcheon on that gavel, with Sean McCutcheon standing on that gavel. Below the gavel being struck down, there's a ballot box. There's protesters, and one has a sign that says "Democracy is not for sale," which was part of the McCutcheon protest. And then you have one that says "Money out, voters in," which was part of the Citizens United protests. And then you have the candidates right there with their big treasure chest, sharing all their new political campaign money. And then right there, you have the scales of law. There's an $100 bill. It's outweighing the First Amendment. I thought that was kind of spicy. And then right there, you have a justice saying, that seems fair to me. I'm going to hand it over to Amar now.
So we also had a little bit, we had another activity, agree, disagree. Might be hard to do given the dynamics of this room, but I think we should still, in essence, try and ask this question. So if you believe lobbying to be inherently good, so if I have money and I want to influence an election, is that inherently a good thing? Raise your hand.
Anyway.
All right, and if you believe that to be a bad thing, raise your hand. So can we get one person from each side to kind of say why they agree or disagree? Jacob?
Sure. So I believe that money should not play as big of a role since it really does not give each person an equal vote and equal representation under the government that they vote for. And it enhances the political agenda of people with more money versus with less.
Mr. Bigard, did I see you raise your hand?
Lobbying is a fact of life, and yes, it seems to become fair. When you have legislators in Congress, they come from the political party, and they have opinions, and their staffers give them their thought soundbites. But you need the other side represented too. So lobbyists try to go in and show them the other side and try to talk to them about a different point of view. Now make it fair, just as good be.
Does anyone else want to share their opinion? All right, I think we're running a little bit over time, so that's our presentation.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, questions? Oh, yeah, thank you.
I know my class has questions, but anybody can ask a question, having heard that.
How did the specific cases you're talking about and overall funding affect the last election, or did it affect the last election?
I mean, surely it did. So you saw a Mars graph right there for Citizens United, just the power of PACs in general. And then same thing with McCutcheon. You saw more and more joint fundraising committees and more money flowing through those committees.
Let me add something to that, just to your question. The last two elections where Sherrod Brown ran for Senate, he had millions of dollars poured in against him by the Republican Party and all the PACs, and won every time. So big money does not necessarily influence, not necessarily win an election.
Though I believe there was a Yale study that found a high correlation between the amount of money you're given and the percent chance that you win an election.
It doesn't always play out. So you see the Bloomberg campaign right now. There's a lot of money pouring into that campaign, but you don't necessarily see results in the polls for Michael Bloomberg.
Right.
Who won the McCutcheon suit?
McCutcheon in the Supreme Court. Yeah. Good stuff, guys.
Is this right? Okay. Oh, did we stop that one? All right, hold on a second.